अभी लाइव तो नहीं है ना? Hello there. The most awaited round of the main examination of the UPSC has started, and the first paper, as usual, it starts with the essay paper. A few things that happened when the moment essay paper was over. I received a few calls. One or two calls were a bit frantic. That was about one student who asked me very excitedly that, sir, I just wrote the first topic, that is truth knows no color, but one thing was a bit odd is that the spelling of the color was COLOR in the question paper. And as you know that from the school days, we have learned it to be COLOUR. And so he was telling me that he couldn't help writing COLOUR, and he was just wondering that has he done anything wrong. So I told him that it is absolutely all right. There is a problem in our country, in India, the standard form of written English, it generally accepted, that is the British English or the received English. But then the Americanism or the North American spellings are also creeping in, and well, it's not such a big problem, but that does create a bit of confusion. So if there's something also happened with you, it's absolutely all right and nothing to worry about. You can carry on writing COLOUR, or even if you have written COLOR, and then in your entire essay, this is the word that you have written, then still you don't have to worry. So these are the very, very minor things, and they do not matter much so long you are writing a very good essay. And the second important thing was that really gladdened our hearts was that here we work very hard on the essay paper and the way we teach it here, and the kind of the team that we have got that does a lot of hard work researching and looking for the patterns in every year of the examinations, and how the UPSC, for example, the slightly changing the expectations from the students. And so what made ourselves very happy that the test paper that we had prepared for the students, and we were very happy that very nearly two of the questions that we had asked in our test paper, which I also discussed live a few months back. And in UPSC question paper, there is a uncanny resemblance, almost very much the same material that has been asked. And I will show you that how it all happened. So for example, this year, one of the topics of this year's paper is the journey matters more than the destination, and it's best to see life as a journey, not as a destination. So this is the UPSC paper's question. It is best to see life as journey, not as a destination. So you see life as a journey, not as a destination. And this is the question below, that is a yellowish strip that you notice. The journey matters more than the destination. This is from our test paper that we had asked. Well, you can see that it's such a wonderful coincidence. Some of you in recent days, in recent times, it is very fashionable to talk about the manifestation. You can also call it manifestation. We call it hard work, analysis, and just a bit of good luck. So the journey matters more than destination. This is the question that we asked in our test paper. And then this is your UPSC question paper. It is best to see life as a journey, not as a destination. But this is not the only one. There is another question that in our test paper that we had put in, and now that is there. Another question, if you look at this year's question paper and essay paper, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. Well, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poetry. And our question that in our test paper that we asked, our students took this test a few months back, and then we discussed this question that is also in the public domain. The paradox of prosperity, more wealth, less peace. This is the topic that we had asked. There is another topic that has got very close resemblance, but this two one comes much, much closer, and that is why I wanted to talk about it. So, well, that really makes us very happy. You can say that it's just a coincidence, but did happen last year as well, and that was also quite exciting because we worked very hard. We tried to figure out the pattern, and then we again, if you so call it the manifestation. Is this live or recorded? It is live, don't worry. Let's come back to the UPSC, the paper. These are the few questions that I was just talking about, that how these two questions have just had so very, very close, almost same resemblance to the question that we asked in the test paper. Coming back to the test papers. Out of sheer excitement, you all must have seen the question paper, and the topics as they go. The truth knows no color. This is the color COLOR that I was talking about. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Thought finds a world and creates one also, and best lessons are learned through bitter experience. Before we start discussing these topics, I wanted to say a few things, because UPSC in the 2020 or 2021, they started asking the questions which are quotation based or abstract in nature or reflective, and which I generally shy away from calling it philosophical topics, because the way you start calling it philosophical topics, so that gives a very strong spin on the topic itself, as if that it has got the very strong overtones of the philosophy, but that's not true. Actually, these are the very generalist in nature. Their approach of the writing needs to be very, very generalist. The first thing. The second thing that we have been telling the students in our classes is that the most important thing is that to pay attention to the guidelines of the UPSC, which we have elaborately discussed in the class, and you have to write everything that is according to that the guidelines of the UPSC. Second important aspect is that your examiner would like to see that whether you have understood the topic very well or not. So understanding of the topic, because even if you are writing a brilliant the ideas, but still if they are not coming quite closer to the topic, or they are not dealing with the topic, then certainly they won't impress the examination. So understanding the topic is one important aspect. And second thing is that you constantly, whatever you are writing, that must be keeping closer to the topic itself, which I prefer to call it is within the gravitational pull of this topic. So the topic would not love if something that is being written that is not part, or that is going beyond this topic. Second thing. And the third thing is that as you know that these are the pieces of wisdom that usually comes from the great writers or speakers, or certain maxims, or the distilled ideas of the thousands of years or hundreds of years. But they have got the strong metaphorical, symbolic, or reflective meanings, or figurative meanings. So for example, truth would mean a lot of things, color would mean a lot of things, In the same manner, the supreme art of the war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, and how this wisdom has been very, very useful, and this the idea has also saved much of the bloodshed in the world on many occasions. So we shall be treating all these topics one by one. So hopefully you have got the question paper with yourself, and these question papers that we have got, and we shall be starting with the first topic. The truth knows no color. Truth knows no color. This is the color that I was talking about. So sorry, there was a momentary technical disruption. So let's come to the truth. What is truth, and what do we mean by color here? It's so exciting. The topic looks so simple. At first flash, if you look at it, it appears so simple. But the truth is something which comes closer to reality. And the color is that the various kind of the spin, or rather the various changes or various kind of the biases that may appear and start giving a different meaning to the truth itself. So, for example, there is a saying, there are many sayings in Hindi. In India, for example, you can start your writing by the Satyameva Jayate. We always emphasize that the truth triumphs, or truth always triumphs, but then the color that we are talking about, the color of that possibly could be that the make the truth hide for some time. It could be bias, it could be racial prejudices, it could be hubris. So there has been the several narratives in the world, and many people manipulated the truth and tried to give the various meanings to the truth itself, and that is how they tried to, for example, they exploit the human society And so we had a kind of the narrative that related to Rudyard Kipling's, for example, he talked about that people like us being white man's burden. Then there was the narrative of colonialism. But Mahatma Gandhi, for Mahatma Gandhi, truth was akin to the greatest virtue that is coming close to resembling God. So the truth would be that which does not take any kind of the color, any kind of the prejudice, any kind of the lacking in integrity. So that was the truth that Mahatma Gandhi emphasized. And in our country, for example, look at the nature. Actually, most of these words or ideas that have been taken, either recently there has been 2025, there is a novel that has been published and that is also called The Truth Knows No Color. But then the fundamental idea is that it all started that if you look at nature, here the color also connotes racial ideas and prejudices. So when we see that the truth knows no color, that is the nature does not discriminate. Nature does not discriminate. Although now there is another question that when we are talking about the truth knows no color, then why there are so many versions of the truth? For example, the wise people or the nice people or the great people, they have said the things in a slightly different manner. So is there the truth universal? Yes. Certain truths are universal in nature. But sometimes the truth can have the slightly different version. कहने का ढंग बदल सकता है. So possibly we can say things in a slightly different manner, but they all can have the kind of the similar goal. And in our country, the great philosophers or the great leaders, sometimes they have recognized that. For example, I would rather write it in English. Ekam sat vipra Oda Vadanti. So this is the invocation of the Rig Veda. It says that the truth could be the same, but possibly there could be a slightly different orientation of the truth. But those who are the seekers of the truth, if you are the seeker of the truth, then there has to be the purity in your heart. That is, you should be devoid of any kind of the prejudice, bias, or hubris. I hope you understand the hubris, the term that comes from the Greek mythology, where the people who have got the misplaced notion of their personal glory or the greatness and the thinking that they are invincible, and how make them blind to see the truth. So the seeker of truth has to have very pure heart. Without any prejudice, they should be approaching the truth. If you do not approach the truth from such kind of the heart, then probably will never reach there. So Mahatma Gandhi, for example, talked about that the means of reaching of any goal, that has got to be pure, that has got to be the once what is taken as universal truth, one has something that has been taken as the truth that cannot be compromised, and the means must resemble that pure truth. That is the one reason, for example, at the time of the Chauri Chaura, he withdrew the national movement, saying that probably we are not still spiritually or we are not ready in terms of the kind of sacrifices that we need to meet, and we are deviating from the truthfulness. For example, the deontological perspective that the students who have studied ethics, and they might be familiar with that. Or Immanuel Kant. So deontological perspective, for example, it says that the sadhya and sadhan, that should be in harmony. And if that is not in harmony, then the truth itself gets colored. And when it gets colored, the result that is gotten, that result obviously will have those kind of the impurities, because the approach itself was impure. So ultimately, we may adopt variety of approach to solve a problem, variety of approach to humanity, variety of approach to economy, international relations, but ultimately, if it is guided by any kind of the negative approaches, then that gets colored. And for nature, for God, for universal truth, there is absolutely no color that is there for truth. So this is what it is here. It's talking about that the truth knows no color. And next topic, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This is a very, very familiar quote that comes from Sun Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, there is a slim book that he had written, The Art of War, and I think this book must have published in millions, because if you go to and see on the roads and the footpath and the bookshops, everywhere you will notice that is being sold. So he said that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So supreme art, that means there could be so many approaches to the war, but the best approach to war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. But then what possibly the war could be? Does it war only means where the two enemies or the two armies are fighting? So what are the other meanings of the war there possibly could be? And the next is that if you are talking about the fighting, is this the fighting only means, for example, where the blood is being shed and the weapons are being used? So we look at this topic from this perspective, and then we try to figure out that how many dimensions can come out from it. So, for example, India was recently in conflict with Pakistan in Operation Sindoor. And what actually happened that with a very brief spell of engagement, Operation Sindoor was called off. There is still a lot of mystery around that what transpired, although on various occasions India has clarified that what was happening. But the question was that we had a certain limited objective, and war can only be used as the very last resort. But there could be so many other ways that we can try to persuade our approach to the war. And ultimately, what is the goal of the warfare? With least destruction. With least destruction achievement of the. So because the war leads to not only the bloodshed, it also creates human misery. It also creates to the lives lost. So approach to the war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So without fighting, what are the approaches? So the approaches are possibly could be persuasion, patience, if you want to write about the examples, Sardar Patel, actually with India became independent, but soon after became independent or even before the independence itself, the big controversies that started coming up that in our country we had nearly 600 kings and rather the princely estates, and they had many of them were virtually challenging the new sovereign country, the India that was emerging at that time. And on many occasions, for example, it might have been much easier to adopt the military approach to subdue those challenges. But Sardar Patel probably used his great statesmanship and statecraft and how the princely estates that were made the part of the Indian Union, and as you know that very well, that the great approach that he adopted, although there was the two occasions, especially in Hyderabad and in the case of the Junagadh, how we had to adopt the different approaches. So that shows that the war can only be a kind of the resort where absolutely nothing works. But then otherwise we should adopt every approach in order to subdue the enemy within us. So, for example, look at how democracy also resembles these tools. For society, there are divergent ideas. The ideas possibly could be absolutely opposed to each other. And imagine that those ideas or those groups or the people who have got the different visions of a country, they start fighting each other, and that possibly could lead to civil war. So democracy becomes a great tool of avoiding any kind of the war-like situation or the civil war-like situations. And in that situation, democracy is one of the best approaches to avoid to enemy without fighting. But here, the enemy also becomes adversary. Contrarian ideas. Adversary, contrarian ideas, different ideologies. Approaches, different approaches to statecraft, and democracy becomes the great tool to do that. Another approach is that, for example, suppose there are the divergent ideas and the people have got the extremely different approaches, and there have been the numerous examples in the world where the societies or individuals have gone to serious state of the fight. But then there is another the way of the solving, or rather the salvaging such kind of situation, is that of the talks, and that is best reflected in the Shastrarth tradition. Shastrarth tradition of India. So imagine that there are the divergent philosophical approaches, and where possibly that people could comes to daggers drawn, but instead of fighting, they adopt the approach of the which is in a very informal language in diplomacy that is also called jaw. But then that language is not to be written here. But then the talks and talks and talks, and probably this could be the, if very skillfully handled, then it can salvage many a situation where possibly you go to a war and that leads to bloodshed, and this kind of the things possibly could be detrimental to human society. Then there could be war within. You may have an extremely conflicting ideas within family or within yourself. So there are the tools. For example, suppose that you are with certain inner conflicts, and that are possibly the robbing away your peace. Then there are the techniques of, because the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So when you are constantly trying to figure out and trying to salvage yourself from the situation, and that is robbing your peace, robbing your health, robbing your mental sanity. So they are the techniques to subdue that war without fighting. You are not at war with your own self, and the technique becomes meditation, guidance. So the fundamental idea of this topic is that there are the numerous situations, or many a time there is a constantly there is a position where the people come eyeball to eyeball, and possibly that could lead to the violence. The violence could be of the ideas. For example, the people getting extremely angry. There could be violent disputes within the families, then the intra-societies, then there could be the interstate issues. But the best techniques are that the mediation. This is the legal tool, and that is also a social tool as well that helps salvage the situation. But the enemy that you were talking about, that enemy could be within, the enemy could be without, the enemy could be openly an enemy country. But there could be a situation, because although in essay writing, as you know that a topic that is given to you, your bounden duty is to use logic, examples, ideas, propositions, and you have to prove it as forcefully and as fully as possible that you have to do that. But sometimes there are the very strong contrarian ideas as well, and you will have to contend with that. So it will be a good idea to write just a few lines about that. For example, the question may come up, if Ram was Maryada Purushottam, then why did he go for a war with Ravana? Or why, despite the presence of the Krishna, the Mahabharata war took place? So all possible avenues to avoid a war, that should be taken care of. That is why the supreme art of war, that is why it says the supreme art of the war. Ultimately, if every possible avenue is exhausted, and there could be an extremely, you can say that the exceptional situation, there could be a situation of a war, but then that should form as a sort of exception. So that is where we started, with Operation Sindoor, because we almost did everything for the last several decades. We have been trying to present the evidence that how a neighboring country is indulging in the terrorist activities in our country. We tried to make the kind of the international opinion related to that, raising the matter United Nations, diplomacy. But then there came a situation. So this is a very exceptional situation. There could be the war like situation, but even this has got to be, even this war like situation has got to be moderated, and it should not spiral out of control. So it should not turn into a elongated, full-fledged big war, like the kind of the war that is going on between Ukraine and Russia. It goes on, and it's nearly the 3+ years and is still going on, and there is no. So the very the wise approach would be to, as a very last resort, there could be a war, and even that itself will have the elements of the supreme mode war, is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So the least amount of the operational power or the warfare techniques that is adopted, and then only then it can be adopted. In the case of the Ravana, you might have noticed that so many the ways that were exhausted, that how this war could be avoided. There is a long story that I don't want to recount. Every Indian knows that, and it's a very well-known truth, that how Hanuman, the Angada, and so many people, they tried to resolve the situations, but finally, at the last resort, something that happened. Same thing happened with the Mahabharata as well. The Pandavas were settled with just a small 5 villages, and still there was no any way out. So war, this topic does not say that there should absolutely shouldn't be any war. It simply says that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. But this supreme art, sometimes it could possibly fail, and then still the warfare that you go into, again, this idea will come here. Then you will have to approach a very smart approach, a very clever approach that you have to take up, and that is how this warfare still can have the least amount of damage, and still you are using the various techniques. Again, the nature of persuasion goes, that psychological warfare that we approach, diplomacy that also goes into going, and that is how the limited, for the purpose that the war that is initiated with the least amount of the damage, you can try to achieve the maximum possible goal that you set for yourself. And Operation Sindoor was one such example. You might have noticed that how some of the many foreign experts in the recent times that have eulogized, they have said that how it was a very successful operation, and with the least amount of losses, India achieved the highest level of goals. It was criticized that why it was taken back then. These were the reasons that to look at it. So the wars possibly have the various dimensions within society, and how without any violence possibly we try to resolve, and this is what we have been talking about. Then we come to the third topic. And what's the third topic? It reads, thought finds a world and creates one also. Now, this is the topic that some students have been saying that has created a bit of confusion, because interpretation of this topic, there has been a bit of confusion. So we shall try to demystify the confusion relating to that. Thought finds a world and creates one also. So what is thought? And finds a world and creates one also. The source of thought, where the thought comes from. So thought is mostly dependent on the kind of the perception that we have got. So for example, the two people are walking on the road, and they look at the one particular incident, and coming from the slightly different background, the two people may have the different kind of perception of that situation as well. So they may perceive the situation slightly different from each other. So perception shapes your thought, and once your perception shapes the thought of your world, so the similar kind of situations, a person can be full of empathy, another person can be full of anger, another person can be full of the disdain. So for example, if you look at the indie dogs. As you know, that this matter came before in the Supreme Court relating to the indie dogs or the street dogs, that what you call indie dogs. And related to that, some people have got a very different way of the looking at it. Some people look at it as a kind of the menace. Some people look at it the kind of the humans need to have a little more compassion, and we should coexist with these indie dogs or the street dogs. But then, so the perception shapes the thought. So the moment your perception shaped your thought, and accordingly, there are the various world views of the same situation. So there could be various world views of the same situation. A same situation can be looked at from the different approaches. So the depending on the kind of thought you have got, because your thought has been shaped by your perception. So how you perceive the situation, and based on that, there's a certain thought pattern you will have got, and this thought will seek the world that you want to see or the world that you interpret it to be. जिस तरह से आप उसका interpretation कर रहे हैं, the way you are interpreting it, and based on that, the thought will finds a world. So when we are talking about the world finds a world, when we are talking about the finds a world, it means that there could be the one rational or the logical situation, but then based on the kind of the thought pattern we have got, we may have got the different interpretation, and we start looking at the situation from a different perspective. And now the chain reaction follows. We have a certain perception that relates to thought, thought relates to, we develop a certain worldview. ये worldview could be about anything, about economy, about environment, about poverty, unemployment, international relations, internal security, how the approach of India should be, how the approach of the world should be, and then that leads to certain feelings, actions also. So what actually says the thought finds a world, but then your thought also creates one also. Your thought can also create a world. So if your thought pattern is not rational, it's not logical, is not the negatively colored, it has got, your thought in itself is not colored by, say, bias or some prejudices. Then again, hubris word that in the previous topic we are talking about. All these things, if they are there, then it will create a world of your own. And sometimes, if you have got the very, very strong, unrealistic, very strong, but at the same time, negative, destructive, or unrealistic ideas, then that will create a world for yourself. And this the world that you create, the reality that you create, the imagination that you create, that will shape your personality. And there is a tragic aspect to that, is that will shape your personality, that will also lead to actions. So if your thought creates one, and this thought coming up can be any kind of the misinformation and prejudices. So suppose if your name is Hitler, sorry, I'm just joking, I'm just talking about the great dictator Hitler, I'm talking about it. So he has very fanciful thoughts or ideas that related to race, purity. So imagine that Hitler was a very weak person with little influence. Then he couldn't have done that much damage. But unfortunately, he had the hidden talents as well. He could sway the opinion of the thousands of the people, the millions of the people, and then he could also got power for himself. But then his colored perception, or rather his thought pattern, created a lot of misery to the world. If you look at the at the present times, for example, there is a gentleman called Mr. Donald Trump. Hope you know that who is Donald Trump. And well, in the very beginning, certainly you must have figured out that we are talking about the tariffs. We are also talking about the recently, for example, how he is looking at almost every alien person, even if they're legally, even if they are there, and this suddenly this a truck driver of the Indian origin and the kind of the accident that unfortunately happened and the steps that is taking. We are not going into that details. What I'm saying is that every country has their right to look after the interests of their country. But while you are doing that, you may have misplaced priorities. Then you may have got again all these things, the biases, the racial prejudices, the hubris, and what is also that the international relations students that might be knowing it, that American exceptionalism that goes beyond the certain limits. So American exceptionalism and the kind of steps suddenly that Mr. Donald Trump has started taking, and then his thoughts, or rather his approach of how he looks at the world, that has just started making a great deal of the impact. But look at another gentleman, Mahatma Gandhi. Preceding Indian independence, a few decades, he had the huge impact on the social movements, political movements, independence movement in our country, and the kind of worldview he had got and what kind of impact it had. So we don't need to talk about that. You know it very well what we are talking about. Then another gentleman, let's talk about General Munir. Pakistan, there has been the great deal of the leaders that have come up in Pakistan who had got very, very crazy ideas about religion, about the India-Pakistan relations, and about their right to the kind of the existence that they attribute to themselves and the way they manipulate the history and everything. But in the recent times, the kind of the exhortation that General Munir has been doing and the talking, that it can push two countries to some dangerous age of war as well. So it's the thinking that we have been talking about it. So if you look at the certain ways, the people that they look and the thought processes. Now the question is that how to keep our thought in such a manner, or how to rather we take care of our thought in such a manner that we do not have such kind of the negative thoughts that comes to, or rather the negative approaches that we adopt in life. So there has to be values that we adopt. So there are the certain values which are for the thousands of years in certain countries' culture that is intrinsically well built. So for example, the Indian thought system and the way that has shaped the approach of India towards, remember that we will be talking about not only the thought, or rather the approaches that a country approaches, then society, individuals. So if we look from the civilizational aspect of a country like India, then a few things that you can write in your essay: Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Atithi Devo Bhava, or rather there are the certain approaches that some countries or some cultures have got, that what is right and what is wrong. But then we have said that no, the people may have the different philosophical approach and we should respect that. So ekam sat vipra bahuda badanti, for example, we also said that. So our cultural history has shaped the way India has looked at the world, and that is why the India has not been the one country trying to invade or subjugate in the other countries. In fact, if you have been reading newspapers regularly, you will notice that recently one Chinese diplomat said in a slightly lighter vein that the past 2000 years India has had some kind of the very strong impact on the China due to its the intellectual capital, and how that in the recent times that the China has come out of it. So you will notice that India's the spiritual and religious processes and the kind of the impact it had got on China. So in the same manner, for example, you will have to talk about that how to take care of these thoughts and where does it comes from. If you slightly want to be a little more technical, philosophical or psychological, and if you want to get the reasons, then the thought process, in order to keep it sane, S-A-N-E, sane, pure, or right path, or humble, which are the things that play a role? The first thing that plays a role, the history or historical development or education system, the stories that we tell ourselves, and then how it gets distorted. So it gets distorted by, again, the narrative, the biases, the strong religious spin, the superiority, the sense of the exalted superiority the certain countries would have. And it can, if it context of the powerful individuals, so if it becomes a powerful context like the Hitler, it has got the specific ramifications. If it is Mahatma Gandhi, a specific ramification. If Gautam Buddha, then it will have such wonderful specific ramifications. So thoughts of a society, thoughts of individual, thoughts of a countries are very, very important. And your thought will always find a word that suits to your perception. And it can also create an artificial world for yourself, or it can also create a make-believe world for yourself. And so the Hitler created a world for himself. And Hitler is just one example. There are the numerous examples. For example, General Munir, I was talking about it, all the very small fry, and it's not to universal example that possibly I can give, but he has created a world for himself, and now he is giving wonderful interpretation of the cultural and ideological differences between India and Pakistan, and how they are different, they are superior, they have got the certain traditions that they come from, all those things. So you can't help it. One specific slightly technical issue, that where does it comes from? So when a child is born, as you know, that Aristotle said that the man is the social animal. So the child is born in a certain social milieu. So the kind of the education system, value system, the customs, the tradition, and the kind of the people, the family, the society, the child sees around it, and then slowly that shapes the perception of that child, and then it starts seeing the world accordingly. And then finally, that if there are some critical distortive moments that comes in the life of that child, then that also shapes for example, that there could be some terrible negative impact, or some very, very positive impact as well. So that starts shaping the thought of a child, and that will be manifested on the actions when it grows up in a person. So if it happens to be the certain power wielding, for example, in family, it may have the certain powers, it will have a different kind of impact. If an individual goes on to become someone like Hitler, it will have a different kind of impact. So these are the things that we have to take into account when we look at a topic. So the variety of the perspective, constantly we have to keep in touch with the topic. We do not deviate with the topic. And the fourth thing is that we try to bring in the different perspectives related to the topic. And what's the next topic? Let's look at it. Best lessons are learned through bitter experiences. Do you agree with that? The best lessons are learned through, well, there is a saying, there is a famous saying that adversity is the best teacher. But is adversity really a best teacher? So, best lessons. That means we do learn the lessons from the variety of the situations. So, it could be humorous situations, it could be the historical moment, it could be the turning point in one's life. But it says that the best lessons are learned through bitter experiences. So, that means you may have the variety of experiences, some good, some bad, some a bit destabilizing, some that makes your heart fill with the mirth. But then the best lessons are learned through the bitter experiences. Now here you may, or sometimes we may, for example, you may or may not agree with the topic, but then this is the challenge, because the topic has been given to you, then you have to prove it beyond all kind of the counter arguments that possibly could defeat it. So you have to prove it. So do you remember that there was a young man, he was in his early 20s and he was traveling by a train in South Africa, and Pietermaritzburg was the station when in the cold night he was thrown from the train, and his name was, well, today we know him as Mahatma Gandhi, so Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. I'm talking about it. Very, very bitter lesson. That gentleman thought that I'm a barrister, British educated barrister, and I can speak English as good as the British gentleman can speak. He was also dressed like a gentleman. And when I say gentleman, actually there was a certain connotation to that word at that time as well. Today it has got a slightly different connotation. So I hope you understand. And then he was thrown out of the train. Even the cold platform, shivering all through the night he lived there. And what did he learn? How did it shape that person's personality? So imagine that you are starting your essay with something like that. So did the bitter experience, imagine that the Mahatma Gandhi at that time, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, he has gone through the several experiences. But how that the Pietermaritzburg experience do you think that might have changed his personality? For example, look at Japan. I don't need to tell you anything about Japan because you all are very the wise people, and as you know that the Japan does not have any kind of the natural resources. I mean, it has got the much less natural resources in comparison to the China, Russia, India, and for that matter, the West Asian countries. But then Japan, and besides the kind of the dangers that usually it's keep going through, that is the natural calamities. So with the passage of time in the modern times, as you know, that Japan became a very, very rich country. So it could have very easily could have bought a lot of good food from any part of the world. But the Japan has known the adversity, and they have known that how the food is very, very important. So even if they became very rich, they continued to cling to the paddy production, and they turned it into a kind of the cultural identity, because paddy production symbolized a lot, that is the food security. तो छोटी बात हो गई ना, it be turned into emotional, then it turned into cultural security. So what this topic means that adversity is the best teacher, and based on that idea, you have to develop this topic. Then we generally believe that here bitter experience it could be so many meaning. It could be meaning of the adversity. It could also mean challenges. It could mean traits. It could mean deprivation. And it's generally believed that adversity teaches us best lessons. How it teaches us best lessons? Because when we go through a bitter experience or adverse situation or a challenging situations, then what happens? We learn to survive. Survival requires struggle. Struggle often requires to surmount problems. And then we also learn so many lessons that we learn. For example, we learn that how to make do with our meager resources. It also makes us resilient, hardy. Our survival instinct improves. Survival instinct, our survival techniques. But the bitter experiences that we are talking about, is it really the lessons only come from the bitter experiences? And how do we describe the bitter experiences? And you might have noticed that the many countries who have gone through the bitter experiences, how they have shaped very well. And for example, if you look at the economic history of India and the recent 100 or 200 years, if you look at it, then how the British policies led to frequent famines. 1943 famine of the West Bengal, which killed nearly 30 lakhs people, and that is very well known. And after India became independent. So the bitter experience related to the food, India became independent. We have the huge shortage of food, and then Green Revolution happened. So in India, today almost all the economic and social policies that are made by the government, the food security is at the center of the most of the policies. The food. And then we learned that unless we grow more food, but the Japanese had got the slightly different reason for clinging to their paddy production. But we have got a slightly different reason, because we were not very rich country until recently, a few decades back. And we also had the meager resources. We have got the huge population that needed to be fed. So the bitter experiences that we went through, we prioritized our the food production. And then the bitter experiences, we will talk about that, how they have shaped the personalities of the people. So you talk about the countries. After the Second World War and how virtually Japan was destroyed, Nagas, and after the atom bombs, and how they built themselves into a very resilient and into rich country. Then about the societies. Look at the simple societies, the tribal societies. For example, the tribal societies, they gone probably almost everything that you can imagine, that any kind of the hardship. So living much closer to the nature, they the prey animals, then nature's adversities, and with meager possessions. So they have learned their lesson to how to survive in that situation. वहाँ पर suppose if you are sent in that situation and to live there for a few days, you will find it then extremely difficult to survive in those situations. So, but they have learned that resilience and the techniques, and the way of life to be very, very happy there. And for example, you can also talk about giving them historical examples and how one of the most powerful kings, that is Ashoka, and after Kalinga War, Kalinga War was a very, very bitter experience, because although every war that Ashoka went through that had a lot of bloodshed, because no war can be without bloodshed, but the Kalinga War, there was just so much bloodshed that changed the heart of the King Ashoka. And the best lesson in the life, that I don't need to talk about it, that how it made the huge example. So, but when you are talking about this topic, in a topic like this, you will have to ensure one thing, that as a topic, when you are writing a topic like this, there is a slight danger of deviating into, that is sounding very gloomy or grim. Sounding gloomy and grim. So that is not the purpose of this topic. So instead, what actually your orientation of writing should be, that since the bitter experiences tests, क्या टेस्ट करता है? It tests our resilience, it tests our survival instinct, and in order to surmount these bitter experiences, we use our resources in a very smart manner. So in that process, it makes us stronger, resilient, and it also gives us the fighting spirit. So that is why this topic says that the best lessons are learned through bitter experiences. But it does not mean that you are constantly portraying a gloomy picture. So you can say that bitter experiences gives the best lessons, but the bitter experiences also gives us tools of survival. So when the country is prospering, when the society is prospering, or in a personal life, for example, suppose if you are not going through a bitter experience, so those bitter experiences that you have learned, even in the happy days, prosperous days, happy or prosperous, I'm talking about the society, individual, country, both. In prosperity, these lessons come handy. They are very useful. And those individuals, those societies, those countries, even the governments or the people or the cultures, those who have gone through it, they have learned their best lessons. So their survival instincts are much stronger and they prosper. So you need not sound very gloomy, but rather you will say that these lessons that we learn, it does not mean that one has to, or a country or a society or an individual or a situation constantly has to go through bitter experiences. ऐसा नहीं है, this is not like that, but rather if something like this happens, the things that we learn, that comes very handy, very useful, that in our day-to-day life for a country and the society. This is the what that we have talked about, and that improves our resilience, our character, our survival instincts, and that is the useful in the various pursuits of the life. What is the next topic then that we come to? Muddy water. Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. Well, there is this topic has got unfortunately a bit limited connotation. In simple terms, if we talk about it, it means actually the muddy water, literally muddy water. What is the muddy water? You know it very well. So if the water has gathered in some place, and if it is rainwater or if the water is mixed with some kind of the dust or some kind of the other sediments, then naturally the water will be muddy, and it says that it's best cleared. So you try so many things, and the muddy water, for example, you try to stir it, you try to drain it, and many other things. But actually this line simply says that the best approach is the clearing is that leave it alone. So the sedimentation process will happen. Slowly the sediments will settle down and water get clearer. But that is the literal meaning. That is the very simple meaning of that. Here the muddy water is a metaphor for so many things. And what are the so many things that possibly it can be? So the muddy water can simplify problems, challenges, dangers, adverse situations, muddy water symbolizes so many things. And the topic tries to say that it is best cleared by leaving it alone. So how do we leave it alone? By not taking, or by taking minimum action. It will also mean patience. The patient approach that we adopt to that. It also means that watch and wait. But there is a problem with this topic. The problem with this topic is that there could be the many situations, the muddy water situations, that is, by merely leaving it alone, it does not get cleared. Or rather, if it gets cleared, then it can, then in that process, it will create a lot of damages. For example, there is a law and order issue. For example, there is a serious issue of discrimination. For example, there is a serious issue of corruption. For example, there is a serious issue that some people or some societies or somewhere the environment is being damaged by the callous activities of the authorities of the people. Many such things are happening. So in those situations, it may not apply. So that is why while you are writing on a topic like this, you will have to start this topic in such a manner that you convey to the examiner that to understand that what kind of the situations this topic possibly can be the best approached. So for example, it would mean, अब देखते हैं, let's see that what possibly can it mean. So there could be situations, let's take it one by one. There could be situations where we set ourselves goals, then we set certain values, and then based on those goals, based on those values, we want to do something. And in those situations, we simply cannot hurry. So hurrying will possibly mean that we may have to compromise the values. So again, here one such example would be that during the British rule, and the Mahatma Gandhi was kind of the undeclared, the kind of the national leader to whom the entire country looked for inspiration. And he said that we are still not ready, or we are not ready till we discipline ourselves to non-violence and and the truth and non-violence, and the certain approach that we adopt toward the adversaries and enemies, that you are very well versed about it, the Gandhian philosophy. So some the youth, for example, the people like Bhagat Singh or Chandrasekhar Azad or the many young people, the approaches that they were adopting, it's historically proven fact that Mahatma Gandhi did not look at those approaches very approvingly. Although he never said extremely adverse things ever about those approaches, but never looked at it very, but rather he said that the situation, for example, when the India was that is going through, and that requires preparing oneself. So once a character, preparation, so the character, the resilience, the truth, this is the only tool that possibly we might be using. And we simply, you cannot hurry. So hurrying, he did not yield to any kind of the idea of hurrying. And the one such example is the Chauri Chaura. But then it required to preparing oneself. That is an approach, that this is the only approach that we can adopt in order to get the muddy water cleared. So here the approach was the muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. Here leaving it alone means first preparing oneself. Preparing oneself, and that is not hurrying the situation. So for example, there could be a situation that a storm-like situation, जैसे when the storm happens, when a flood happens, so what actually happens that we sometimes take ameliorative steps, but at the same time we try to see that how it goes away on its own. The whole problem starts with this topic is that although it's very difficult to remember in the examination hall that where this idea came from, Alan Watts, an American philosopher, 1970-75, he died, and very powerful speaker. So he was much influenced by the Indian tradition, Buddhist or the Sanatana or the Hindu or Vedic traditions, and his public lectures were very famous. He has written many articles. In a particular situation, he said this. So when he said this, he meant that, what actually he meant that in a difficult situation, in a turbulent situation, or in a situation where possibly we become a bit helpless, then the best approach is, he meant actually, what actually he meant, the best approach is patience. The best approach is that to while away the time, but in the many situations it may not be very effective. So अब इस topic को लिखने के time में you need to be very very careful, because you will have to portray it in such a manner that we need to have the virtue of resilience, patience, and instead of hurrying by taking destructive steps, we have to avoid hurrying and taking destructive steps by unethical approach. So that is, we would rather suffer than adopt an unethical approach. So these are the things that it is talking about it, and it is simply utilizing the virtues of the patience and the ethical approach towards a problem. But at the same time, when you are writing, if you are adopting and if you are choosing to write an essay like this, then you will have to posit it with the contrarian arguments as well. So that will be another important paragraph that you will say, however, there will be situations where the muddy water, so that is the muddy water that symbolizes some destructive situations or other unbecoming situations or other inhuman situations और इस तरह कुछ भी बात लिखते हैं that will require that will require instant interference or steps that needs to be taken, and in that situations probably the patience or other leaving it alone possibly may not be the best approach, but still the wisdom of this topic says that we should not give up on adopting humane approach, ethical approach, truthful approach, or rather the keeping of our value system intact, or for example, we do not go beyond the legal boundaries or the constitutional boundaries or the democratic approach that which is enshrined in all the fundamental values. So this is the what it's leaving it alone. You can give an interpretation to this in a situation like that. So naturally, for example, if there is a war-like situation, if there is a threat to the country, naturally your leaving it alone possibly would not work. But then the wisdom of this topic, you can interpret it something like this: still we will take care of the certain approach or the certain values we will not compromise with. But as in the beginning, as I said, that this topic does create a bit of dilemma, because the situations where the muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone, and figuratively what it symbolizes, it has got the certain limitations. They are the equally strong arguments that there will be situations where we need to take immediate steps. While you are taking the immediate steps, for example, suppose you were an administrator as a police officer, you are trying to reason with the certain situations, then you have, while you are taking the steps, that you will take into account by the certain obligations or the restrictions that is put on you. So that will be the approach, and this is the one of the problematic topics, and some people who might have taken it up, then I have not yet met any student right now. Hopefully in a few days someone will come up and they would say that they took up this topic, and but it will be very, very difficult to not to strongly write the other half or other the contrarian aspect of that. Anyway, let's look at the another topic. देखिए, taking the example of this topic, we are also right now learning a very important lesson, is that in a UPSC question paper, there can always be one or two topics that will put us in a kind of the existential dilemma, that which approach to take. Do I have to strongly prove it and saying that this is the kind of universal situation, but rather the contrarian argument will become more important than the trying to prove this topic, and how that balance that I can create. And if I'm taking the contrarian approach, the other side of the coin, then things that I write. So this is a good example that every year one or two topics that you get which creates a bit of the situation that puts you in a dilemma. Now let's look at the other topic. Next one, the years teach much which the days never know. That's quite interesting topic. The years teach much which the days never know. So what does it mean? Actually, this year's topic, R.W. Emerson's, this is the second the quote or line from Emerson. If you go through, you don't have to actually go through, but rather if you have been reading ever read any general knowledge book or any books of quotations, you might have seen that there is a large chapter that classifies the quotes from Emerson, and this happens to be the one of them. But in the examination hall, we do not have the luxury of going to the reference material and trying to figure out that who this quote belongs to. So let's give up on that. But if sometimes, occasionally in the examination hall, kabhi aisa hua, if somehow you could figure out that this is a topic and where it comes from, So it will be a good idea to write about that, but the chances are that the 8 or 9 out of the 10 situations it will be difficult to recall that where it comes from. Then you look at the face value of this topic. And the years teach much which the days never know. So it means that the longer perspective, of the certain issues, problems, happenings, longer perspective shows a lot of changes. But in the shorter perspective, days that it is talk about, we may not perceive the changes that in the long term that something may bring. So in the shorter perspective. So this topic actually it wants to say is that we need to approach any action in life with longer perspective, or rather we try to project for the longer future, or the long future, is that what kind of impact possibly would have, because in a short span of time it will not unfold itself, it may not yield itself that what kind of the impact it will have. So the years teach much. So that is, we wait for something for the long time, rather we are patient, or we look at it, we are trying to use the perspective, then it brings newer perspective, but then in the shorter period, we may sometimes miss our goal, or rather we might end up taking some wrong steps. So this is the topic that it's talking about, and then we will have to give the variety of the examples. And Sigmund Freud once very interestingly said one thing. That's very interesting. You can write in this essay that, well, he said that if youth knew if age could. So if age could, actually this is a very succinct expression. If age could, it means that the people who have got the several decades of the experience in their life, but the problem is that by the time the physical energy wanes, they do not have that kind of the energy left to take those steps. And if youth have that kind of energy to do that, but then unfortunately they do not have that kind of the experience or the kind of the long view that they may possess. This is also called distilled wisdom. So distilled wisdom is with a long perspective, after a lot of experience and taking into consideration of the variety of the things that have passed in your life and how it has changed the perspective. So we will have to give examples that how with the passage of the time and in the various fields that you will have to choose. For example, you will have to talk about science. So understanding of the science, for example, the 50 years back, 100 years back, whether in the field of health, universe, chemistry, technology, how with the passage of time it has changed. We will also talk about our understanding of the environment. For example, if you look at in Paris 2015, in that how the countries came together and decided that the temperature of this planet in taking the base the time as the industrial revolution, and from there it should not be more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. You should not go beyond that. But at the time of the industrial revolution, when those developments were happening, when the great the industrial activities were going on, did anybody know that with the passage of time, there will be a situation where we will be facing a situation called global warming? Nobody knew that there will be a situation like that. So you will have to take into consideration historical examples. In 1938, the Munich Agreement. Chamberlain was the Prime Minister of Britain. Britain was the most powerful country in the world at that time, and the rapid rise of the Hitler and the Munich Agreement, what happened and how the Hitler completely changed and rather did not honor, and what happened and afterwards that, and how the world went through. So you will have to take into consideration, and will write about the variety of the issues. What actually want to prove is that the long-term perspective teaches us a lot, because in a very short perspective, if we try to reach a conclusion, agar kisi very short period of time, if you try to reach a certain conclusion, chances are that we might go wrong. So what is the best approach that possibly we can have? We can have, for example, huge logic, rational approach. We use age-old wisdom. And well, what Sigmund Freud said that if age could, if youth knew, if age could. So there are the many cultural traditions, especially in the Asian or Eastern cultural traditions, where the older people, they are given a lot of respect, be it the Japan, China, or for that matter, the India. So the certain wisdom that comes with the use, that is also used, and then we projection, logical projection, because wherever we want to have the wiser perspective, or rather the useful perspective, then either the years teach us more, so we will have to take a much longer perspective, so we may have to wait, or rather we can use the wisdom from history, because very short span of the time, it can have the different kind of result. For example, look at the situation you can use it as a case study, and I'm not very happy to talk about it, because if in the recent the past few decades, if you have watched Hindi movies, you might have seen that every second movie would portray Punjab as a very happy-go-lucky, very prosperous, green, the wonderful, the scenario from Punjab. It will come from prosperity and the rich people, and how the happy life they would have, because it was one of the greatest beneficiaries of the green revolution. But unfortunately, the agricultural pattern that it adopted, especially paddy, then irrigation, pre-electricity irrigation, then the chemical fertilizers, and how it has brought a lot of ecological destruction in Punjab. So the groundwater level has gone down, and how the chemical pesticides and fertilizers is playing havoc with some people, and leading to the carcinogenic unfortunate situations, and then other the environmental the issues that are coming up, because we are not going in great details. As you know, that one great agriculturist once he said that unfortunately in a few decades time, if Punjab does not mend its ways, it will turn into a huge dust bowl. So in this topic, what we want to see is that we emphasize the wisdom that long-term approach brings, how history becomes important, So either we wait longer or we take wiser approach, because in a short span of time, since we cannot know much, so you can also quote Santanya, for example, say those who don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it. And what are the tools that will come? This is the tools that I was talking about: history, the logic, the essay, the distilled wisdom, the cultural traditions. If we ignore these approaches, then possibly we can go wrong. And you can also give the examples of how in environment and the science, historically, globally, many steps. Unfortunately, we could not foresee that what possibly it can bring and how it has brought unfortunate or rather the destructive situations. So let's come to the next topic. And I was talking about the topic is best to see life as a journey, not as a destination. In the beginning, I was saying that how this is one of the topics that in our test paper, we almost very identical topic in our test paper that we gave to the students, and here at KGS, a student wrote those essays. Already a few messages, of very elated messages have begun to come, that how they were very happy to figure, because we also had elaborate discussions on this topic as well. So, well, but now let's look at it from the perspective of the UPSC topic. And in the beginning of this this class, I did mention that the topic that we had asked. So it is best to see life as a journey, not as a destination. Again, it sounds like a very, very simple topic. Life as a journey, not as a destination. Well, there is a psychological perspective, symbol of psychology. Says that the best approach towards success is to focus on process. And not goal. So focusing on the process and not goal. Journey, when we are talking about the journey, there is a, you might have read about the famous invocation of Aitareya Brahmana. There is a situation where the Indra, the king of gods, is telling his son that in life the best approach is continuously move on, instead of trying to focus on a destination and thinking that if I reach there and everything will be over. So the idea was charai, he said that charai veti. Aitareya Brahmana, there is a story that is where the Indra is telling his son that how the constantly moving that yields the real results, real happiness, instead of rather we are focusing on destination, because destination is the end. So the destination brings a stillness, Stale, stillness. Destination is also in a very macabre sense. I didn't want to say that, but it also symbolizes death. It also culmination. So it's the journey that is important. Why journey is important? Because it teaches us many valuable lessons. So it teaches us new discoveries. it gives us new perspectives. Although I'm so tempted to, on other topics as well, I was quite tempted to mention some Hindi or the Urdu piece of poetry and ideas, but then the English, the medium essay that you write, unfortunately, you cannot quote much, except for that if you very well known invocations like Charai Beti, but again you write it in English and mention that Aitere Brahman and the, for example, if I said the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, luckily the many people will recognize even the English language, so you can write it Roman script, or the truth is one, but the wise people have put it in the different words, and that was the invocation that I was right about it. So here, सैर कर दुनिया की गाफिल, जिंदगानी फिर कहाँ, जिंदगी कुछ गर रही तो नौजवानी फिर कहाँ. So that is, it's the journey that teaches us, gives us a new perspective, resilience, experience, and as the famous line that goes on, the show, sorry, the show must go on. So that means that in the hundreds or thousands of years of the history of the humanity, the many stumbling blocks, the many new events keeps coming up, but then the show must go on. That is, that even during the freedom movement, the many people who led their lives, but then खुश रहो अहले वतन हम तो सफर करते हैं. So for example, they looked at it from the future perspective, that how life must go on, because if you are thinking of the end game, so that brings everything to the conclusion and life stops. So the best to see life as a journey. So everything that happens in a journey, that is life, and everything that happens in a destination, that is, here I wrote stillness, culmination, end, death. So the life means that you continuously look at it journey. So when we look at it continuously as a journey, then what actually happens? That you believe in action. Then you believe continuous action. What happens? That actions, when you take actions, then you are filled with some kind of exhilaration, and that believes motivation. That leads to more action, and that leads to a newer perspective, and then that is also about the learning as well. Now let us expand it to some other perspective of the life. So while it so happens that you are in a journey, and there will be impediments as well. So when there's some strong impediments comes, then the valuable lessons that you learn, and that since the show must go on, so that is one particular important invocation. You can write in the English translation that kya haar mein kya jeet mein. The former Prime Minister of India once Subhas Bhai क्या हार में क्या जीत में किंचित नहीं भयभीत में कर्तव्य पथ पर जो मिले यह भी सही वह भी सही. So for example, how science progresses, when we set a goal for ourselves, that if it could be again the matter of the security, it could be a space, health, technology, we never have a fixed destination to that, because one thing leads to another, and on the path of the development of the science, the new discovery that keeps coming up, new challenges keeps coming up, we keep trying to solve that, and how we continuously move forward. In the same time, it's the economy. Constantly the new challenges keeps coming up. We keep finding the new ways to solve them. And then again, the new perspective comes up, the new challenges comes up, and then again we keep finding a solution to them. But there is no any end game to that, because the moment you talk of the end game, that sounds like the end of the universe. The same is the humanity. You talk about the humanity, science, society, environment. For example, take the issue of the environment. Continuously again, the new challenges that keeps coming up, and we are on this journey. We are trying to solve it, trying to find it new solutions, new problems keeps coming up. But the moment you think of the culmination or end of that, then it brings, these are the things that I was talking about it. So the topic, what actually it wants to emphasize is that there should be constant action. Constant action, then the constant novelty, and the constant new challenges keeps coming up and solutions. That is how the life goes on, because we do not look it as a destination. Very, very simplistic topic, very simple topic, and rather it's a kind of the one of the finest examples of writing and a simple reflective essays. While you were talking about that, we will also talk about that the people like some great personalities, like Gautam Buddha, for example, if you talk about him, that for him, he looked at it life from the much larger perspective, because in the shorter perspective, things were very easy. It was very, very happy life for him. Then he looked at the endless journey, or rather the universal journey of the humanity, and how the humanity can solve its problems that related to the miseries, dukkha. Dukkha is the term that is in Pali that has been written, and how this solution. So many people have taken the much longer perspective related to humanity, and this is the constant journey, that examples that you keep taking up. You can talk about the statesmanship, the great leaders or the statesmen who think in terms of the hundreds of years, the thousands of years, that how possibly the country will go on. And for example, you can also talk about that the many individuals or society or the countries, they set themselves the material goals. But the country like Bhutan set the goal that everything that we do in the entire journey will be focused towards happiness. So the gross national happiness that they talked about, happiness. So when you are looking at the best to see the life as a journey, you also have to decide that what kind of journey you want. What kind of journey you want? Is it the journey, this journey, for example, are you going to be an extremely competitive? Are you going to be the jealous? Are you going to try to acquire those kind of the knowledge or those kind of the weapons or those kind of resources which possibly will be detrimental to the environment, detrimental to this planet, detrimental to your neighbor, or it will be rather in harmony with everyone else. So you will also write in this essay that what kind of journey that you choose to be. Your life, the best to see the life as a journey. So what kind of journey it will be? So what steps we will take for this journey? How the foresight becomes important, how history becomes important, why the distilled wisdom becomes important, how the elderly people becomes important, how the foresight, the culture, the customs, the traditions become important, how the rebellion and where we need to shade, just like the tree shades its leaves, in the same manner that how the some old and not very useful ideas that you shade in the process, what role do they play? And that is how we approach this essay. Now let's come to the last topic, and this contentment is natural wealth. Luxury is artificial poverty. The Eastern traditions in our country, Eastern traditions, especially in our country, the contentment we have eulogized as a virtue. As you know that for thousands of years, the humanity, because of the fundamental quest of humanity has been, the fundamental quest of humanity has been is happiness, wealth, power, love, harmony, but in this process, the humanity and the natural instinct of the Homo sapiens is to accumulations of resources. So the more resources they accumulated, it gives the feeling of more power. It gives the feeling of being more in control. But in this topic, what actually we have to write is that ultimately, because if you are hankering for more and more and more and more, so the more and more mein kya cheez hai, the things that will come from, that will be the power, wealth, happiness, money, resources. But what actually happens that the blind race towards possession, it unfortunately creates a rat race. You understand what is the rat race? Now, rat race has got the very strong figurative meanings today. It's a kind of the mindless pursuit of material goals or the material happiness, the mindless pursuit of the material goals, the mindless happiness, where fortunately you never reach there. So whenever you reach there, you suddenly find that, oh, the new goals have been already been set up. The new expectations, the new ideas have already then come up, and then you are exhausted, and then again you carry on doing that. So when it comes to the luxury, what is luxury? Contentment means, you might have read about minimalist movement. Many people have begun to see that the mindless pursuit of the power, money, resources is rather putting a lot of stress. So why not to learn to live with our minimum requirements and then maximize our happiness? I have also discussed certain occasions in the class that is about the degrowth. Now, some developmental economists, they have been talking about this new idea about degrowth. It says that instead of excessively emphasizing on the growth and the constantly creating the new material products, which is endangering the planets, and rather it's not bringing us real happiness, because if we purchase one thing, then we think one more, then another, then yet another, something like that, and how this urge for more and more possession goes on. So rather it says that, so this topic says that, so the degrowth, that is the slowing down, is probably the best approach towards life. Minimalist think the best approach is life, because this topic said that Socrates probably said this, that luxury is an artificial poverty, that is, contentment is natural wealth. So when you are content and when you are working for the minimum needs, not for ostentatious show off. You don't want to show off to the people. You don't want to tell the world that, look, I have got this position, that position, and all this position of the world that I am creating. For example, look at the greed of the Dhananand, the Nandavan's king, the greed of the king Midas. So the luxury becomes an artificial poverty because suppose you have got an bicycle. You want to have a motorcycle. Okay, the motorcycle is there. Then you want to buy a car. Then the car is there. Then you want to buy a luxury car. The luxury car is there. But then suddenly you notice there was a movie. Amitabh Bachchan and I don't recall the name of that movie where he was so much obsessed with the money and power is that when he notices a black helicopter chopper that has been bought by his sons, so Amitabh Bachchan says that I like this machine, why another one? Something like that. So the possession, what actually happens that it becomes a rat race. So never ending race. So when you are possession of something, suddenly you notice that the new things have come up, new possessions have come up, or noveris, noveris people have come up, other rich people, other possessions, and then you feel that it turns into artificial poverty. That is, you feel yourself to be deprived. Suddenly you notice that another possession that I require, then you feel yourself deprived. And when the feeling of the deprivation comes from, then you are very desolate. You feel very bad, disheartened, and then that is what the topic says, that the luxury is basically an artificial poverty because it's a never-ending race. But suppose there comes a time when you look at it, look at the world, look at your personal position, and you think that the contentment, that how I will be happy with what I have got, and I will rather emphasize on the happiness instead of constantly be in a rat race to possess something. So this is the fundamental construct of this topic. Now, when you are talking about this topic, you will so many examples that you can give. You will talk about the consumerist society, material world, materialism, some ills of capital. You don't have to decry the capitalism on the whole, but rather the ills of capitalism. Then we'll also talk about that the constant hankering after the material possessions. It is robbing our mental peace. It's robbing our the simple sanity. There is a famous the book by Gertrude Strain, that the name of their book is There Is No There. That is, when you reach that goal and you have got a very fanciful idea, wow, if I have got this much possession, then I will be a very happy and rich man. But when you reach there, you notice, oh, there, yani ki the dream that you had in your mind, when you reach there, this is not the dream, but rather the dream has become much bigger. And then you are feeling desolate, disheartened, someone who feels defeated. So what this topic is said, the contentment is natural wealth and luxury is artificial poverty. So this is the sense of poverty remains. Although using ostentatious dress, ostentatious food, ostentatious social symbolism, you try to portray yourself as a powerful and rich man, but in the heart of hearts, you know that still there are the much richer people. There are the many other luxury goods which I have not acquired. So the sense of deprivation is always there, but the contented person, the sense of deprivation is not there. The time is running out, but you can also talk about the Diogenes, the Greek philosopher, and how he de-emphasized the material possession. You will also talk about the Stoics, how they rather in keeping with the harmony of the nature and emphasizing the virtues, and how the rejecting the constant hankering after these luxuries. He will be talking about the such people. Talking about the Gautam Buddha, he talked about, Lord Buddha talked about the possessions and how constantly it becoming the hankering after the possessions and trying to chase it as a source of happiness, but rather it's a kind of becomes the source of the misery. While you were talking about and giving all these examples, you will have to contend with each philosophical orientation the last and most important thing that you need to write is that you will have to give another interpretation, another spin to that. This will make your essay very, very balanced. Is that for example, when a country like India, or for that matter any country, when it pursues material wealth, just say for example in India, nearly a decade back it was the 11th richest country in the world, today it's the 4th richest country in the world, and while it is pursuing the material wealth in India, it will have to be very, very careful, because it is not on the wrong path of the luxury, but rather in the right path, which does not compromises on the values. Does not compromise on values, does not compromise on equality, justice, and it does not compromise in what constitutes true happiness. अब यहाँ true happiness का मतलब क्या है? What is the means true happiness? In a very short while, I can just give a passing reference about the Bhutan that talks about the gross national happiness. So, what are the ingredients of that? Because the emphasizing on the satisfaction, the quality of life, equality and justice, and that should be taken care of. And all these are the virtues, are in harmony with contentment. So, these virtues are the comes very close to contentment. But if like Donald Trump, we merely thinks in terms of the how more and more the traffic will, the tariffs will enrich America, because the other countries, they will open their market and the more products of the America will sell there, and how they will be restricting, how the jobs of the non-Americans that could be restricted, and various other approaches that is adopting. So that is the hankering after more and more, and he is compromising the many well-established, enshrined values of the international order. So that you can also give the example of that, and you will show that they expand the meaning of the contentment by including these values that I was talking about, and how the country, again, you will have to expand these values in the individual life, you will expand these values in the social life. So it does not mean contentment, don't write contentment as a deprivation, don't contentment as a someone who is absolutely not pursuing any kind of the material wealth, rather not being obsessed with that, and they're having the certain the lines drawn that beyond that we would not be hankering after that, we will not give up on our values, we would not give up on our family values, we would not give up the fundamental values of my country, my personal values, and the boundary that we draw beyond it, because mad pursuit of the luxury becomes artificial economic poverty. That is what it's trying to say, because you are always a deprived person, because there is always more, there is always something new that needs to be taken care of. So that was 2025, the essay paper, and comparatively speaking, it can be said that it is an easy essay paper. One or two questions, they have the bit of the struggling that we have to do. For example, the muddy water topic that I was talking about it, and again, on a very happy note that I was talking about it, that the two of the topics from our the sessions that we had in our institute, the Khan KGS, and here the two of the topics that almost very closely resembling that has been asked in this question. So at least for us, it's a very, very happy moment. But again, I wish you all the best, and many of you will be taking this examination in the coming next year or coming years. Wish you all the best. Thank you very much. Good luck.